Hi, I'm Nate the Bias User, and today I'm going to be doing a rundown of a bunch of records that I would be more than likely to review if the circumstances were different. But I recently got a part-time job, which means I have less time to dedicate to this YouTube channel, and I was already crazy behind on stuff. So for my own sanity, I thought I'd acknowledge the existence of these records, give them a score, and I would also bring up, this is a part 1, where the part 2 was a roundup of records I loved. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be mentioning some great material here. There will be records I bring up that should be more than likely an honorable mention for the year-end list. Speaking of which, I'll start with April Mixtape 3 by Snow Strippers that has a very good and dense percussion palette that definitely existed in the dance field since the early 2000s, or probably even the 90s, but it really stays up to date, not to mention it having its relative amount of darkness in the atmosphere. But to bring up my complaints, there are a handful of tracks that come in very soft, but they're not terrible, and there's plenty of bangers to make up for that. Under Your Spell is easily one of my favorite dance pop cuts of the year, so I'll give this album a 7.1. Next, from the album Anohni, My Back Was a Bridge for You to Cross, I was plugged in with the classic soulful detail on the intro, not to mention the passion coming from Anohni's strong voice, and I was liking the droning noises coming out of the guitar on the short follow-up Go Ahead, but I wasn't hearing anything afterwards except maybe the track Can't to come off as strong. Good production, but I still couldn't get into it. I'll give this album a 5.6. Next, Austin is very much a slow burn of a Post Malone album, which really affects my level of interest, because I don't find these tracks to be all that stand out relative to the kind of slow burns we've heard from him. Some being acoustic ballads, some being your typical mainstream pop, and they aren't terrible, at least not most of them. And we do get a regular pace cut that goes synth pop. Speedometer, great track, but it's also the only good track on the record. I guess Sign Me Up was decent, very dreamy, but simultaneously derivative as hell. I'm gonna give this album a 5 exactly. Next, I Inside the Old Year Dying is a pretty raw PJ Harvey record. Not that she hasn't been relatively raw in her production before, but I was mostly put off by the softness of a lot of this thing. And while this record is a listenable experience, there are some good tracks here, I still left this finding it to be one of, if not the most underwhelming record from PJ Harvey. I'm gonna give this album a 5.9. With Nas Magic 2, I was never into the Magic series as much as King's Disease. I'm still not to this day. I'd say this one is closer to the mid than the previous. And Magic 3 didn't seem to help. It's decent at best. I'll just give Magic 2 a 5.2, and I'll give Magic 3 a 5 exactly. Next, Glasses. Okay, moving on, we have yet another album from the likes of Damon Albarn, who early this year had the Gorillaz album Cracker Island, but here we have an installment to the other side of his music career. This is the new Blur album, The Ballad of Duran, and it's decent. It's interesting how this thing can feel so low-key, while still having the Britpop of their earlier records, but that might be what makes the record so underwhelming. It's kind of too low-key for its own good, but this thing has highlights. Barbaric is a beautiful track from the catchy group vocals to the riffs, and it gets better when an orchestra shows up and blends with the chorus. There's good composition here, but there's only so many of those. I'm gonna give this album a 6.3. The name Turquoise Death rang a bell before listening to this newest record, So Buena, but when listening, I was not convinced I heard them before. But it's getting a lot of Album of the Year hype, so thought I'd check it out, and I'll just say, I get the appeal. There are some solid complexities in its atmospheric drum and bass approach, and there is beauty to be found. Just take the bright bell synths on my favorite track, The Sky Fell, or the peaceful acoustic on Sinking Into You. But the production was not as engaging as it could have been, or even atmospheric. Like, yeah, this is very much an atmospheric record genre-wise, but only to a fault. I didn't feel very surrounded by what I was hearing, and it all felt digital enough for me to have a hard time noticing any strong detail. So I'm pretty on the fence with this record, but despite that, I do think Turquoise Death is showing a lot of potential that can be built upon even if it's not on this record. I'm gonna give this album a 5.7. Next we have Amara, who brings a very mystical and also sensual vibe with her newest record, Fountain Baby. And along with her high-pitched and feathery voice that already stands out, her performances are very well done. She can rap in a relatively fast flow, but when singing, very orgasmic. Her repeating the words "Air, I Need Some Air" on Co-Star while passing quickly does stand out. And her slow singing on the track Water from Wine, flowing with the slow instrumental, production-wise sounds like I'm listening to a song while underwater. Not that I've been underwater recently. But even with my praises, this record at certain points will underwhelm. It can be pretty generic, but I liked it overall. I'm gonna give this album a 7.4. Pardon the interruption, but the rest of this was filmed on a separate day. And on the separate day, I will go to the album by No Name, Sundial. I've been anticipating a new No Name album for a while. Now we have this newest record from her, Sundial, and it really goes to show how much she wasn't interested in making a new record. The instrumentals play it so fucking safe. It's all the soulful, tight-produced beats she's known for, but no experimental risks shown. I guess her rap flow is a little aggressive, on potentially the interlude to be specific, but for most of this thing, it's very too typical. It's not bad, it's flavorful, but is it worth coming back to like anything else she's dropped? No, not really. I'm gonna give this album a 5.1. On to this record, Before Rabbit Girls by Chris Yogi Tunes. It's a pretty rough around the edges mashup record, but when this thing hits hard, the comforting side of the production is shown ironically, and the songs that come in to make it a mashup does come in well, especially with the original instrumentals. They give a good dramatic effect to the I Can't Feel My Face by The Weeknd sample on Yoki Poison, and there's a sense of slow spinning wonder brought with the Ariana Grande Thank You Next sample provided on Thank You Loser. But yeah, this is a fun record. There are some production screw-ups at times, like the fast fade-ins and outs that threw me off with Magic of a Lifetime, and there is an annoying static effect that can occur when hitting too hard, but more hits than misses. I'm gonna give this album a 7.4. Trippie Redd, A Love Letter to You 5. Where are all the bangers? Where have they gone? That's all I have to say, but it's listenable. I'm gonna give this album a 4 out of 10. On to Mid-Air by Paris, Texas. It is a hard-hitting, noisy, experimental rap rock record, and I can't at all find this to be very enjoyable. In fact, at times I find the heaviness of this thing to be somewhat annoying. Not an awful record, but simultaneously not for me. I'm gonna give this album a 5.2. On to the new Slowdive album, Everything Is Alive. The legendary shoegaze and dream pop band Slowdive is back with their 5th record, first in at least 5 years. Everything Is Alive. A record I had a relative amount of anticipation for, despite me not really enjoying a single Slowdive album since Still Is Lucky. Was not a fan of its follow-up Pygmalia, or the self-titled, but I'm happy to say, while this newest one isn't perfect, definitely their best in a while. There were a handful of tracks I enjoyed for various reasons, but that's to be expected considering the variety shown here. The intro shanty, it's pretty windy, but I appreciate how clean the drums are here. Pray Remember, while low-key, very atmospheric and dreamy, great track to get lost in, and with Chained to a Cloud, I can't get enough of the bright, pokey synths throughout. So yeah, this thing packed in qualities, but there are underwhelming moments as well, enough for me to not love this record. I'm gonna give this album a 7.1. Teezo Touchdown and his cartoonish nature is finally giving out a body of work with all that in it, How Do You Sleep at Night, where the album even stands out in its own way, with the snappy, voice-overlapping autotune, and we also get mid-song genre transitions that were well done. For example, the track You Thought, going from experimental rap rock banger to a blissful melody with the likes of Janelle Monáe. There's also the closer The Original Was Better, that goes from an exciting punk rock cut of a rising section to happy hyperpop. I wish I liked more songs here, but it's still fun, good stuff. And to all the people defending this album on the internet, I just have to say, you're doing God's work. I'm gonna give this album a 6.7. Post-rock act Sigur-Rós comes back with a cinematic orchestral feel that's atmospheric and meditative on ATTA, which ends up making this album, while almost an hour long, feel a lot shorter than it is. But with my main issue with the album, the atmospheric production can be too dense for its own good. And while usually when a record feels shorter, it's a sign of a good project, this was just a very passive listen. But there are tracks I like. I love the passionate humming going with the violin on scale, but I can't say I liked much on that level. I'm gonna give this album a 5.7. With Mitski, The Land Is Inhospitable and So Are We. I'm sorry, I'm just not a Mitski fan. This new record is just too skeletal in the instrumentals for my taste. But Bug Like an Angel is still a great intro. But my feelings for this record overall, a 5.7. James Blake playing Robots into Heaven does have a good bit of off-putting in its experimental realm, but more good than bad. I can't get enough of James's voice, despite me and other music listeners coming across it so much. I'm gonna give this album a 6.7. And the last record I'll talk about is the new Lil Tecca album, Tech. Lil Tecca is a mainstream rapper with potential. He has some very fun tracks, but I can't really find them on this newest record. Besides the title track. Can't really say much for anything else though. I'm gonna give this album a 4.2. Like, subscribe, comment how you feel, give a suggestion, check out my other social medias. I'll see you next time. And with my next video, I'll more than likely be doing a bunch of records I loved. I said this before. And I guess I'll see you then.